Welcome back to the program here on Resonance FM 104.4 on your FM dial here in the great city of London, England, and worldwide on the internet at robsimone.com. It's a great pleasure to introduce my next guest, someone whom I've had the pleasure of knowing now for a few years, and we enjoy talking about the same subjects, and it's a pleasure to have him on the show. William Henry, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Rob. Really appreciate it.
Yep, it's my pleasure. You are known as an investigative mythologist, and I want to talk to you today, sort of open things up with the subject of Stargates, and especially how they relate to Sadam Hussein. Now, this caught my attention when I heard you talking about it on another program, because recently I've been involved in the Dan Burish case, and I've been meeting with the key people and the key players involved. I just finished writing an article about it, and in that case, this Area 51 scientist turned whistleblower, he talks about opening up a Stargate on Frenchman's Mountain in Nevada, using a very interesting combination of biological material and electricity, something that I go into further detail in the article. And it created an enormous reaction. First of all, do you think that such a thing is possible? And are these things, if they are they happening on different places around the world?
Well, I most certainly think that it's possible for something like that to occur. My particular mythological specialty has been focusing on the numerous gateway stories that appear throughout myth and scripture. In fact, it's my belief that the reclaiming of these secrets of these ancient gateways are really the motivating force behind all of human endeavor. It's what drives our religion. It drives, today it seems to be driving our politics, and certainly, as you're alluding to here, it's driving our frontier science. And so I would say that there are numerous groups of people around the world that are operating on the premise that these gateways are in fact real.
Yeah. And what do we're going to look at this in the ancient context, of course, but let's take this in the context of this Gulf War that's unfolding. Do you think that Sadam Hussein himself was investigating this and perhaps even able to achieve activating one of these dormant Stargates in the area of Iraq or Baghdad?
I absolutely believe that's the case. In fact, I started documenting that possibility beginning in 1991 during the first Gulf War, when it became public knowledge, not necessarily mainstream knowledge, but it was public knowledge that Saddam Hussein believed that he was the reincarnated biblical king Nebuchadnezzar. And as was reported then, he had spent the 1980s, he spent over $500 million during the 1980s rebuilding ancient Babylon as a tribute to Nebuchadnezzar. And so that was a very interesting bit of commentary that was just truly phenomenal. A lot of the Christian prophecy interpreters caught a hold of that in particular because it's believed by some that in order for the Lord to return, that Babylon must be rebuilt and destroyed. And so here appeared to be another clear marker in a long line of biblical prophecies that were beginning to manifest.
You're right about that. Just to throw in, there's a great picture I have of a soldier sleeping in front of a commissioned painting by Saddam, where it's a portrait of him and a portrait of Nebuchadnezzar exchanging alms or exchanging flowers.
Yeah, it's actually a palm tree.
Palm tree, okay.
That he's handing off to him. Nebuchadnezzar has the palm tree behind him, are his chariots and this sort of archaic and ancient weaponry. He's handing the palm to Saddam, and behind him is a modern jet fighter, modern weaponry. And the message is crystal clear that Saddam is receiving the torch of leadership from Nebuchadnezzar. So coming from the perspective of writers such as Zecharia Sitchin and others who I had begun studying at the same time in the early 90s, I just started to pull on this thread of this question, is Saddam Nebuchadnezzar, or does he believe that he is? And if he does, what does that mean?
Yeah, and also there is I have a picture of this on my website, the rebuilding of the Tower of Babel. that Sadam built, which I think was the first thing that was destroyed.
That's right.
During the beginning of the war, yeah.
It resembles, my recollection is correct, it resembles an antenna, or it almost looks like an Apollo craft on a launch pad type of a thing.
It's a spiral.
The spike, yeah.
Yeah, it's a spiral tower, kind of like a stairway to heaven. If people want to take a look at it, just go to robsimone.com and they can take a peek. But you're talking about Zecharia Sitchin. He was really the one that opened all this up back so long ago.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He started publishing books in the 70s, soon after we landed on the moon, and proposing this idea that ancient Iraqi and Sumerian myth and scripture is loaded with references to beings called Anunnaki, which is a very general term for a class of beings that came to Earth from the heavens. And the story that Sitchin retells or reinterprets based on the original stories is that they came here, they brought technology, they may have had a hand in crafting the human body for certain purposes, and they left it with a promise to return, or perhaps never did leave and are still here.
Aha, yes. And this is sort of the foundation that so many theories of ufology are built on.
Yeah.
And the current day events seem to keep reinforcing Zecharia Sitchin's theories. What with the looting of the museum in Baghdad.
Right.
Yeah.
And as a mythologist, my primary interest is in these ancient gateway stories.
Yeah.
I believe that these are the primary myths and pieces of scripture that we want to pay attention to. For example, you have the Garden of Eden story, when Adam and Eve are evicted from the Garden of Eden, which some believe is Mesopotamia or ancient Iraq, by the way. So Adam and Eve are evicted from the garden. Yahweh, or God, builds a gate, and he places cherubim on either side of the gate and a flaming sword in the middle of the gate and forbids us to return. Well, that right there is the primary human challenge, is to reclaim the secrets of that gate and re-enter the paradisical world. And from my research, it appears that all of human endeavor has been driving towards reclaiming those secrets of that gate. We had a very interesting episode called the Tower of Babel episode, in which Nimrod constructed a gate or tower or ladder that reached into the heavens. But Yahweh decided that he didn't want company at that time, so he smashed our tower and separated humankind by language, a situation that's still in effect today.
You kind of set us back a few squares.
Well, yeah, exactly, for whatever reason. And Sitchin's proposal would be, or his take would be, that these were Anunnaki gods with a little g, not the big God with the big G, that decided that humankind was not ready to join the Anunnaki.
You know, it's funny. It's metaphorical for that the arrogance of man. Perhaps he had help from outside sources, but for whatever reason, he was going for the tree of life too soon.
Well, possibly, but you can also take a conspiratorial view, because after the Tower of Babel was destroyed, the word Babel, the meaning of the word Babel, was changed from gate to confusion or nonsense. And all who talked about the gate and the possibilities that the Tower of Babel represented were called babblers.
Ah.
And so you have to wonder, why would God change the meaning of the word and forbid us from reclaiming these secrets? Well, I think that was a question that was asked by an individual who claimed that he was the reappearance of Nimrod.
Who was that?
Nebuchadnezzar.
Ah, he did he?
Yes. Nebuchadnezzar sought to match and even outdo the accomplishments of Nimrod. So what did he do? Well, he reclaimed tremendous ancient knowledge. He built what is apparently some form of a device called the golden image of the beast that he built on the plain of Dura near Babylon. And what Nebuchadnezzar found is that while he had this apparent piece of hardware, what he lacked was the software to make this gadget work. He knew that the wise men of the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem could make this gadget work, or at least he believed they possessed the software. so what did Nebuchadnezzar do? Well, like any other world conqueror, he just simply went into Jerusalem and took what he wanted.
Yeah.
He brought the wise men from the temple back to Babylon with him in the famed Babylonian captivity. And this is where we are now discussing a very key episode that relates in my theory that Sadam was searching for a Stargate, because without an understanding of Nebuchadnezzar's desire to duplicate Nimrod's Tower of Babel and the meaning of this particular episode called the Fiery Furnace episode, there is no link between Sadam and the Stargate. This is it, right here.
Ah.
And in this story, what happens is that Nebuchadnezzar has this fiery furnace, and he has tried everything to get this thing to open. He's tried music, he's tried clapping, dancing, anything possible. Along come these three wise men from the Temple of Solomon who make a wager with him that if they can enter this fiery furnace and come back out unscathed, that Nebuchadnezzar will convert to their religion. Well, in the story, what happens is these three wise men put on their coat, their hat, and their other garments, and they enter this fiery furnace. And then they come back out. And not only are they in pristine condition when they emerge, but they're not alone.
There's an extra guy with them.
The book of Daniel says that the extra person with them is either the Son of God or one like the Son of God. And so we just have to ask ourselves, Rob, what just happened in that episode?
Yep. It just swings the door wide open.
Absolutely. And so this is, when I made the connection of that story to Sadam and Nebuchadnezzar, the question was instantly formulated. Sadam has made it perfectly clear that he seeks to redo or duplicate all of the feats of Nebuchadnezzar. He must have known about this fiery furnace or been seeking its secrets.
Absolutely.
And there's no question that that happened. In fact, as part of this theory, I predicted that we should pay attention to stories about a blue stone involving Sadam. And I predicted this based on knowledge that it appears that in the ancient times that the prophet Jeremiah had been forewarned of Nebuchadnezzar's desire to loot the Temple of Solomon. Okay. And in lore, we're told that he escaped Jerusalem with a blue stone that he took to the hill of Tara and deposited there.
Okay.
So based on that, I said, well, we got to be starting to look for a blue stone to appear in Saddam Hussein's story. And lo and behold, what happened, immediately after we invaded Baghdad, here comes the story that Saddam trained the Iraqi people to believe that he not only was Nebuchadnezzar, but he brainwashed them into believing that he had a blue stone implanted in his armpit that made him immortal. I believe that blue stone could be the blue stone that Jeremiah had taken and hidden.
This is interesting, because I've also been researching this blue stone. And Saddam and his brother Uday gathered up every psychic, every intuitive, and every person that was involved in the occult and brought them in to one of his palaces so that he might use their powers for seeing visions, for helping him predict the future. In fact, Saddam his brother was responsible for starting the Department of Parapsychology at Baghdad University.
These guys, they are not stupid people.
They were obsessed with the occult and obsessed with the mystical aspects of the Holy Quran. And this blue stone, I've heard stories, but from an Islamic perspective, Saddam was seeking a talisman, something that would... he was always obsessed and afraid and paranoid of being assassinated. He had body doubles. He did all sorts of strange things. And the stone that he always carried around with him was given to him by a mystic who said that as long as he held the stone, he could not be killed. And the story goes that to test it, they put the stone around the neck of a chicken.
Right. And
they fired a rifle at this chicken at point-blank range. And all the feathers were blown off of the chicken, but the chicken didn't die. And from that point, he carried this thing, and the story goes that he took a sliver or portion of the stone and had it inserted under his skin so that even if he lost it physically, he'd still have some with him.
Yeah, there you are. And here is a crucial link to Nebuchadnezzar. I call them the Blue Stones of Atlantis because these blue stones just keep appearing over and over again, and it was, again, to me, pivotal in linking Sadam with these ancient myths, especially at the time of Nebuchadnezzar, which I call them myths, but you would have to agree, I think, that we're talking more about history now than we are about myth. Sadam was operating from a clear blueprint, and he was very, very close, I think, to accomplishing something extraordinarily dangerous to the Western world.
He was tampering with the forces of creation, one might say. Well, let me just take it back real quick to Nebuchadnezzar. He reckoned that he was the incarnation of Nimrod.
Yes.
Now, what was Nimrod's intersection with tapping at the door of this gateway? How did he become obsessed or to go into such great lengths to open this gateway?
Well, first of all, we have to recognize that Nimrod is considered to be the founder of Freemasonry.
I was just going to say, yeah, he's the first one.
Yeah, in fact, when the Statue of Liberty was sent to New York Harbor, it was built up, it was placed upon a pedestal that's a model of a Babylonian ziggurat in honor of Nimrod, the founder of Masonry.
Wow.
Nimrod is a very, very wild guy. One of the most interesting things that I've ever learned about him was that his full name was Nimeruduk. Marduk or Meroduk being the son of an Anunnaki god called Enki, who sits in credits with the creation of the human body. Nimrod was also called a mighty man, and he called himself a mighty man because he claimed he discovered a skin that was made by God, or Enki, for Adam, his first creation. And when Nimrod put on this skin, he was transformed into a mighty man. This is, in my opinion, the original archetype of the Superman story, the mighty man story. The human that puts on this garment that turns him into a super being. And in fact, Nimrod, we are told, was not a single individual. He was a whole race of beings who also shared in the putting on of this garment or cloak.
Wow. And so it could be said that Nimrod was the son of the Anunnaki in a more direct lineage to the Anunnaki than most everyone else at that time.
And that's right. And so what I wonder, Rob, is, okay, are we talking about a literal physical garment that he put on?
Right.
For example, MIT is presently developing a new suit of battle armor for the U.S. Army, the U.S. military. It's a nanotechnology super soldier suit that when the soldier puts this suit on, if you shoot bullets at him, the bullets ping off. He's resistant to chemical attack. In every way, shape, and form, MIT is creating a technological suit for a new mighty or MIT man.
Mm-hmm.
Because as soon as these guys put on this new cloak, this garment, which also has the power of invisibility, they are a superhuman. They are untouchable by the average human individual.
Yep.
And my point is that not only do we find these gateway stories, but what accompanies the gateway stories? Well, inevitably, you're finding tales of gods who are putting on or taking off some kind of cloak or garment.
Well, in the case of
before
Nimrod,
Elijah ascended into the whirlwind, he took off his pallid garment, his miracle garment, and passed it to Elisha, his priest. Remember the 3 wise men from the temple who entered the fiery furnace for Nebuchadnezzar. Before they went in, they put on their coat, their hat, and their other garments.
Yeah, they talk about garment. Well, in the story of Elijah, that's Old Testament. Do you know what the chapter and verse is on that?
No, I don't.
Okay, and
the story is that when Elijah ascended into the whirlwind, 50 prophets witnessed this event. It took place at a place called Gilgal, which is very interesting because later the crucifixion of Jesus took place at a place called Golgotha, which is based on the root word Golgotha or Gilgal. The number 50 is very intriguing, the 50 prophets that witnessed this event, because 50 is often cited as the number of the Anunnaki.
How so?
Well, that's the number of Enki, the ruler of the Anunnaki, and in various places it's cited that there were 50 of these Anunnaki beings.
Well, in the case of Nimrod, putting this thing on, building this tower, we always think of it, and it's very well described as a structure. Do you think, though, it could have been more of a metaphor for the very same device that Nebuchadnezzar had constructed?
I'm not sure it's a metaphor. The reason why is because the Tower of Babel was in a place called Sumer, which is also called Sumeria, present-day Iraq.
Yep.
Sumer takes its name from Meru. The full name of Sumer was Su-Meru. And Meru is one of the most ancient of ancient words, and what it refers to is the axis of the gods, the pillar of the gods. And on my website, williamhenry.net, I use a very interesting diagram of Meru from a 2nd century Chinese manuscript. This particular diagram of Meru looks like an antenna because that's what Mongolian myth says it was. The immortals were said to have dwelled at Meru because of the energy that was emitted by this antenna. Not only does it look like an antenna, it also looks like a human skeletal system, which is most interesting. But I was in Florida one time giving a talk on this subject, and a scientist came up to me after my presentation, and he said, look, I was basically asleep through your presentation until you put up that blueprint. And I said, what blueprint? And he went through my slides until he came to this 2nd century Meru drawing. He said, that blueprint. And he went on to tell me that he designed particle beam weapons for a living. And he said that the diagram I'm showing is a blueprint for a particle accelerator. What do you do with a particle accelerator? Well, for one thing, you can slice and dice matter, but for a second thing, modern theoretical physicists are describing the possibility of building giant space-based particle accelerators for opening stargates and wormholes.
Who's talking about that?
You can read that in Scientific American. Paul Davies wrote an article on that very subject.
I see, because in the near zero weightless environment, these particles would react differently.
There you go.
Yeah. And, we're talking about building or recreating these things using our high-tech latest gadgetry and nanotechnology, but given the materials that they had back in Nebuchadnezzar's days or Nimrod's days, it would seem clear that there was a different science back then that was capable of achieving the same results as we are today without the billions of dollars, without all this. It seems like we're doing it in a very less efficient way. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, that's a very interesting perspective. In fact, I've talked with Richard Hoagland, who's a famous science commentator about the Iraqi Stargate thesis. And his issue with it, or trouble with it, is that he doesn't think Sadam was looking for a real or actual Stargate because he didn't think it would last through the ages.
Okay.
My response is, well, what I think he was in search of and might actually have possessed was the knowledge concerning it, which is even more powerful.
Oh.
In my opinion.
Yeah. To use it
for...
for...
about no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Well, I beg to differ. I mean, when you're talking about what was looted from the National Museum, the cylinder seals that were left by the ancient Sumerians portray clear examples of gods flying around in craft, of various pillar-type devices. Their stories are loaded with references to what appears to be nuclear warfare. All the gods did was fight amongst one another. Of course, there's going to be tons of references to ancient weapon systems in those records. And
it seems as though we currently, especially in the West, are blind to these transcendental technologies because they don't incorporate the same Newtonian laws of physics and elements and energy that we are only left to draw upon. But back then, they had this more esoteric means of producing similar effects, like with beam weapons.
They did, and it seems that they were coming from that alchemical perspective, where they had access to a fuller consciousness than we're working with today.
They had a different science.
And a different science, I mean, today, none of our elevators go to the top.
Yeah.
But then, it looks like they had a few individuals whose elevators went to the top.
Yeah, this Nimrod is truly interesting. Anything more about Nimrod that might give us a greater perspective on his supposed subsequent reincarnations?
Well, it appears that Nimrod does the same thing over and over again, and I can't say that Sadam is the reappearance of Nimrod any more than we can say for sure that he is Nebuchadnezzar, but it is this quest for knowledge that was inaugurated by Nimrod that seems to be the motivating force of Sadam.
Any evidence in these ancient texts or otherwise that suggests that Nimrod was able to achieve some sort of limited success in tampering with these creational forces?
I don't have evidence that he was tampering with them, other than the episode that we already talked where Yahweh said, hey, enough's enough.
Oh, right, yeah.
And in my opinion, I go back to to Sitchin's suggestion that when we're talking about Yahweh, the Old Testament God who destroyed the tower, we have to answer the question, why is this guy so psychotic? I mean, on the one hand, he tries to be the good father, but then on the other hand, he'll whack 50,000 people at a time, and is described as a jealous God. How do you explain this bipolar behavior? And Sitchin cut right through that to say, in his opinion, Yahweh is two ancient Anunnaki gods whose story was combined into one God in the Old Testament. And so what I would suggest is that you have the antagonistic part of Yahweh that destroyed the tower, while you have the benevolent part represented by Enki in the Sumerian stories who sought to uplift humankind.
I like that. I also like the idea that Yahweh was one of the members of the Council of 13 that consisted of 12 other off-world, very knowledgeable, but not divine beings that were having a bit of fun here on planet Earth, and Yahweh got too greedy. He loved people worshiping him. He loved drawing upon people's power and taking their energy in the form of praise.
Yeah.
And he was just held in check by the other members of the council.
Yeah, a very good rendering or drawing of that type of personality is the hero in the movie Stargate.
Mm-hmm.
Most of that based on Sitchin's work, but not credited to him, but still... Yeah. That's a very good example of that kind of personality take. Yeah,
well, let's bring it back up to the current situation with Saddam Hussein. Now, he was put in, by and large, with the help of the CIA. Did he have a predisposition to thinking he was Nebuchadnezzar, or was this something that manifested after he was able to achieve this rise of power?
Well, from my research and analysis of his life story, I would venture that something happened to Saddam when he was in Egypt, especially in Luxor, in the early 1960s. That seems to be the turning point when he started his rise to power.
Uh-huh.
And I would suggest that that's when an awakening might have occurred. It would make a lot of sense if that were true, because of the power of those places in that part of Egypt. Luxor, Abydos, Karnak are just astoundingly powerful places, and especially Abydos is where you see like the Shrine of Osiris that shows a clear reference to a very powerful piece of technology called the Pillar of Osiris, also called the Ladder to God, the Stairway to Heaven. And it's this Pillar of Osiris that I document that has a platform that resembles in form, and I believe function, the biblical Ark of the Covenant.
Okay.
Which was part of what Nebuchadnezzar was after.
So Saddam was there during what period of his life?
He would have been in late 20s, early 30s.
And why did he go there?
He was exiled. He was run out of Iraq.
For what?
Because he went against the grain of the reigning political party, so he escaped and went to Egypt.
Which probably put him in favor with the CIA. That's
exactly when the CIA entered his life.
Yep.
That's what I'm saying. I think this would be the time, and so that would be certainly a part of his life to isolate.
You know what else strikes me as interesting is that his life was saved by a Jewish woman. His mother was considering aborting him, His mother had her own problems, and she thought that she was convinced that her child was evil. And it was a Jewish neighbor who convinced her to have the son, and went on from there. But his mother was greatly disturbed and had dabbled in sort of mysterious forces and witchcraft a little bit like that. And I think that he had a disposition to that from a very early age.
Yeah, and his belief in reincarnation is fairly evident, or at least his belief in cycles of history. I recently had a tidbit of research that I had dug up and placed in the back of my mind. I had it brought to the forefront of my mind when I talked with the Nostradamus expert John Hogue recently.
Yeah.
The tidbit of information, we were talking about Nostradamus' famed 1999 King of Terror prophecy. When the King of Terror would come out of the sky and resurrect the king of the Mongols.
Yes.
Genghis Khan.
Yep.
And the tidbit that, as I was talking with John, I could just hear the shutters in his mind just blowing wide open. I said, well, Saddam believed apparently in cycles of history or reincarnation. In fact, he identified George W. Bush as Hulagu, who is the grandson of Genghis Khan. And Saddam said, look, this is none other than Genghis Khan, the father Bush, and Hulagu coming back around to re-destroy Babylon just like they had done in the 13th century.
And they made sure they did it.
And they made sure they did it. Well, here was what blew John Hogue away. He said, wait a minute, Hulagu? He said, do you know that Nostradamus experts consider Hulagu to be an anagram for the king of Anglemois that Nostradamus referred to? And what that suggested to John and to I immediately in the conversation is that the King of Terror, who resurrects the King of Anglemois, is Hulagu, and it is George W. Bush.
Well, it wouldn't be the first time he was referred to as the King of Terror.
There we go, but now we have this interesting link coming from Saddam, who readily identified, look, George W. Bush and his father, we've seen these guys before.
Yeah.
They're Hulagu and Genghis Khan.
Extraordinary.
Yeah. That's the type of thing, you're not going to hear about that on mainstream news.
Clearly not.
In my opinion, this is the type of mentality that is motivating these people.
Yeah.
They know who they are. They know what's in Iraq, and they're there for these purposes, not the publicly stated purposes.
George Bush didn't even have a passport before he became president. He has no global context. He's only been conditioned by the people around him that tell him about the world. So it's an interesting, he's kind of like a blank check. He didn't even know why he got into office until 9/11 happened. So it is, the recipe is right. In other words, the conditions are right for someone like Bush to actually be the one to fulfill these ancient prophecies. And given, everything that's happened with Iraq, they're doing a heck of a job. They're right on course.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But the thing is that they're not cluing us in on what the blueprint is. And I'm not saying that I know what that is, but I am saying that the reason behind this, these efforts to lock down Iraq and the Middle East has to do with reclaiming this ancient knowledge.
And speaking of that, let's talk about Saddam. He's put back in power. He's starting to investigate. They're digging up all sorts of things in Iraq. He's really allowed to run amok. What does he find, or what is he looking for in the sands of?
Clues come. I started following the art newspapers and beginning around 98, 99 when I started talking about Saddam's Stargate connection. And I found some really interesting run-ups that actually beginning in 2001, Saddam appeared to have been orchestrating this effort to reclaim Iraqi artifacts. He actually contacted, or had his archaeologists contact the British Museum saying, look, you guys came into Iraq in the 1860s and on. You've got over 10,000 Iraqi artifacts still loaded up in crates in the basement of the British Museum. Would you make copies of those and send them back to us, or send the originals back? And they agreed. They would do that. This is at the same time that Tony Blair is saying that Saddam Hussein is, persona non grata number one. So you have this disconnect between what the British Museum was doing and what Tony Blair was doing. After that, Saddam had his art keepers and his archaeologists contact the Berlin Museum and said, look, you guys stole the Ishtar Gate of Babylon, which you have in your museum. We want that back. And of course the Germans told them to stick it. But the point is that what Sadam was doing was creating, I call it a Disneyland for the Anunnaki. He was assembling a massive tourist trap, if you will, where he was going to bring together, he had something called the Saddam Hussein School of Cuneiform Studies that he was going to open, where he was going to teach people how to access this ancient knowledge. And he was going to bring it forward for a global audience, intending that people would come to Iraq and see this. Well, he had to be stopped because, in my view, much of what this knowledge ultimately points to is that the ideas, many of the ideas upon which Western Christian civilization is constructed, Saddam possessed some really destructive knowledge that would have been just tantamount to a nuclear bomb if it were released as far as Christianity is concerned.
And it also appears that he might not have been aware of the full potential of all these things at first, but the CIA probably caught wind of it and probably tried to slow down or thwart his efforts, which in that case his own counterintelligence would have tried to find out why, and they might have discovered the CIA's grave concern, and that might have led them to discovering the even greater potential of these artifacts and their language.
Yeah, one of the artifacts that I'm working with right now is Saddam's clock tower.
Okay.
This was built in Baghdad, and it was built so that every hour on the hour, this clock tower would play a drone that was to honor Nebuchadnezzar and also honor Saddam.
I mean a kind of a tone?
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and this clock tower, it's enormous. It's about 400 feet long.
Good Lord.
And he had a library that he was building at the apex of it, and it was to be a really interesting sort of an archive. And the story that I'm working on right now is the astounding similarity of Saddam's clock tower to the Spear of Destiny, as it was called, which was a complex that was designed by Heinrich Himmler, that was designed as the centerpiece of the Nazi brain trust, if you will.
Yeah.
And they're identical complexes. And what I'm trying to make now is this connection between that clock tower and the Spear of Destiny. And if Saddam had been following Heinrich Himmler's path, we know that the Nazis were in fact doing extraordinary research into the ancient world, even Iraq. And because the Iraqis and the Nazis ultimately traced their roots to the same place, the Anunnaki.
Oh.
And so what I'm wondering here is what did Saddam really know? I mean, it's astounding.
Well, was this clock tower a museum, or was it a device as well?
Well, it's a device as well. It actually worked. And
it was something it wasn't, in other words, a clock tower like Big Ben. It was something.
But not like it was laid out on the ground.
Okay.
And it's approximately 400 feet long. It looks like it's a perfect union of male and female. It looks like a penis entering a vagina. That's what it looks like.
Okay. And do you know the mechanisms?
No, I don't. I'm still trying to get some more research going on it right now.
Oh, okay. But we do know that there was a tone involved.
Yes. That Time magazine reported on this when we invaded Baghdad originally, rather in 2002. They showed aerial photographs of downtown Baghdad, satellite images.
Okay.
And I saw that clock tower. I said, man, that is an amazing looking thing. I mean, many of us might remember some of the various military memorials that Saddam had constructed. When we first went into Baghdad, they started showing us some of that stuff. We don't see it as much now, but that's when I first caught wind of this. It's really incredible.
Was there any other devices or buildings or structures that Saddam constructed that went along with this obsession?
Not that I've been able to see yet, Rob. And I had hoped. I mean, after we first went into Baghdad and the invasion went so successfully, I was very confident that guys like me, in fact, I was thinking, gosh, I'd love to go to Iraq now with Zechariah Sitchin.
Have a look around, yeah.
It all seemed possible just for a brief moment, and then chaos.
Yeah.
And it's still chaos. And so, to be perfectly honest with you, I sort of backed off the story a little bit. I thought I'd let some of the dust settle, and now it appears the dust isn't going to settle. And so I've decided, well, I'm going to have to jump back into the research now, hardcore.
From a distance. Well, any evidence that he actually did manage to recreate some sort of Stargate?
No direct evidence, not yet, no.
And but it's certainly possible. Do you think that he might have done it?
If given the opportunity, yes, absolutely.
What would his intentions be? Did he want to go back in time? Did he want to visit the Anunnaki? What do you think was his mindset?
Well, again, all I have to base it on is the profile that was established by Nimrod and by Nebuchadnezzar in knowledge that Sadam was attempting to match or outdo what they had done in the previous world. In the example of Nebuchadnezzar, when he opened the fiery furnace, out comes the Son of God. You know what, or one like the Son of God, who we have to presume is Jesus. Now, you know what the book of Daniel says about the appearance of this figure? Absolutely nothing. It does not say, well, yes, of course, the Son of God came through the fiery furnace and he brought the secret recipe for Jell-O. You know, it doesn't say anything about what he did. But Iraqi legend and lore is loaded with references to this figure. In fact, his name was Nabu, which is the basis for the name Nabu or Nebuchadnezzar. He took his name from this being, or this title. Nabu means royal one, or the Lord.
And we have no idea of what happened to this fellow after that event. He could have very well...
Do. He stayed.
Yeah, he stayed, yeah.
He brought his wife, they built ziggurats, and
you mean
libraries based on this figure's knowledge. And
this figure brought his wife with him? He brought his wife from the void with him?
Yes.
Okay. At a later time.
Later time, exactly. Yeah.
And they stayed and they...
develops is that, okay, this is like the movie Stargate. These beings come and go.
Yeah.
And this particular one hung out for a little while.
Okay.
Left tremendous knowledge.
Okay.
This is what Sadam was interested in.
Right. Do you think it was a megalomaniacal kind of aspect where Sadam figured that he was some sort of chosen one? Or was he being more crafty and more more interesting in developing these sciences for strategic supremacy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know that Sadam had what we would consider to be a spiritual bone in his body.
Huh.
I think he was after this purely for
power,
world domination purposes, for what he could get in terms of making himself the new king of the world type of a figure.
Yeah. This is absolutely extraordinary stuff, and I'm glad we got a chance to go through it. We have to take a quick break right here, but when we come back, we're going to talk about Mary Magdalene, and we're going to talk about her in a way in which I'm sure many of you never heard before. Stay with us. We're talking with William Henry. His website is williamhenry.net. Hi, this is Rob Simone. Join me here on Resonance FM for your weekly journey of discovery. It's back talking with William Henry. And just before the break, I was talking about Mary Magdalene. And, of course, this is not referenced in the Bible, but there are some who say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that she came from Syria. And if that's true, why is that significant?
Well, and again, this is the Syrian reference comes from a Mary Magdalene researcher, Sir Lawrence Gardner, who I'm sure many listeners are familiar with.
Sure, he's been on the program.
Mm-hmm. And when I followed that up, I said, wait a minute, she's from Syria? And actually, the reference I think Lawrence provides is Jacobus de Voragine, who was a 13th century Italian chronicler who also labeled Mary Magdalene the Illuminatrix, the Illuminator, the Illumined or Illuminati, which was the title that he had given to her. And that's, by the way, the title of my book about Mary Magdalene, The Illuminator.
Oh.
And so when we follow this connection that is provided that Mary Magdalene came from Syria, we run right smack into a goddess who we presume would have been an influence on her, the goddess Ishtara or Mari.
Ah.
And this is a really interesting turn of events if we can make that link because in the Syrian Museum at Aleppo, we have a life-size statue of Mari. And in this statue, she's wearing an extraordinary-looking helmet. She has on one of the most incredible-looking garments that you have ever seen. She has blue stones gathered at her neck. And when we turn to, again, Zechariah Sitchin for insight into this goddess and this getup that she's wearing, we learned that the name of that helmet was called the Shigura helmet, which Sitchin literally translates Shigura to mean that which makes go far into the universe. We're told that her garment was called her Pala garment, which means miracle garment. And we learn about these blue stones that have this magical capability. And when we put all that together, we say, well, would it be possible that Mary Magdalene, coming from this place, who was raised as a royal child, according to Gardner, is it possible that she may have been instructed in these ancient myths of this Anunnaki goddess, Mari, or Ishtara? And as an aside here, I wonder, the coat, the hat, and the other garments that the three wise men put on preparatory to entering the fiery furnace in the story of Nebuchadnezzar, is there a connection with Mari's Shigura helmet that took her far into the universe and her miracle garment that she put on?
It seems as though there could be some sort of, crossover there.
A crossover.
Yeah.
If so, then this opens up some really strange circumstances or possibilities about Mary Magdalene as slightly more than a temple prostitute who's basically a ne'er-do-well in the biblical narrative.
Yeah, the people that got a hold of these texts, that put it into the present-day biblical form, which was it's not even how it looks like 100 years ago. There was the Apocrypha was in there, so there's still stuff being taken out even in quote-unquote current days. But back then, these males that were pulling all the strings back then, it said, really wanted to diminish Mary's importance. So do you think that there could have been even more to Mary's significance beyond what people are ready to believe as far as her perhaps being the wife of Jesus, that she might have been endowed with some sort of great wisdom herself?
That's the perspective that I adopted in the book, and that's what my research revealed as well. I mean, again, everything we know about, or virtually everything we know about Mary Magdalene comes from apocryphal texts. I mean, the Bible says nothing about her appearance, her age, her place of origin, no personal details whatsoever. And so then we have to look to sort of the mythical realm for clues about who this person was. And in my book, I make the statement right off the bat that she's one of the most mysterious of all literary figures. Because while I personally believe she existed, I can't prove it.
Yeah.
And so I said, look, I'm writing about a literary figure, and this is what the literary tradition says about this woman, that she was from Syria, and not only that, she's also connected with the priestesshood of Isis, which suggests the possibility that she was in fact trained at places like Abydos and Dendera, which makes sense because, especially in the case of Dendera, it was a perfumery. And Mary Magdalene was also a perfumer. She created an anointing oil.
And which she used on Jesus' feet.
Exactly. And so when I add all this up, it suggests to me that this meeting one night in Capernaum, which was supposed to be the first time that they met, was not by chance. We're talking about a couple of heavyweights in their own right coming together, a meeting of the minds, a joining of forces, not just a literal marriage, but also a mystical marriage, a sharing of knowledge. And in this sharing of knowledge, she takes on an unprecedented role.
And it certainly is possible, given the fact that she was the first one to see Jesus after he was resurrected.
That's right. And as I talk about in the Illuminator, that one of the more sort of glaring possibilities that emerges from this mindset comes from that event in Capernaum, because before Jesus meets Mary Magdalene, he's confronted in the synagogue by the wise men who say, listen, you're trying to tell us that you've got credentials as a prophet, and one of the things that we would expect you to do is to produce the manna, just as Moses had done. And this is where we get these very strange but direct statements from Jesus that he is the bread and that his Father manufactured the manna, and he seems to possess this insight into this substance from heaven that, to reference Lawrence Gardner once again, appears to have all these extraordinary capabilities.
Yeah, the substance that came down when the Israelites were fleeing Egypt and sustained them in the desert.
That's right. And so then what happens is this bread substance becomes intertwined with the notion of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Christ and the bread are interchangeable.
Yeah.
And so if that's the case, then how are we to interpret this story that Mary Magdalene was the first to see the risen Christ bread on Easter morning?
Yeah, there's unleavened bread and then there's leavened bread, and Christ is, I guess, the ultimate leavened bread.
Yeah, and so the question is, when she sees the bread rise from the tomb,
so to speak,
are we talking about actually an alchemical allegory? Is Mary Magdalene an alchemist, and is Christ a substance manufactured and is not, in fact, a person? Jesus is a person. Christ, or Christos, is a substance. In fact, it's referred to as an oil, which she manufactured. It's a perfume.
The anointing, yeah.
Anointing.
Yeah.
So that's the path that I'm following and saying, well, wait a minute, if we follow this path, it could lead us to some really extraordinary places. And the backdrop for this is, once again, her connection to the goddess, the Anunnaki goddess Mari, who traveled far into the universe, went through the gate of the underworld. And we also have the scenes of Isis from the temple of Osiris at Abydos, or the shrine of Abydos, shrine of Osiris at Abydos, where we see figures, Isis and a priest, who are operating a pillar attached to the Ark of the Covenant, from which they're bringing some form of an oil.
And it's interesting to note that the actual translation of what Christ was known for, what his father Joseph was known as, it goes back to the expression of master of the craft.
That's right.
And everyone, I think, in the Middle Ages, he became a carpenter. But it was also thought that phrase could meant alchemy.
That's right. And so this is the picture, and again, as you can probably surmise, that the stepping stone, the stairway even is, you take the first step with Sitchin, then Gardner comes in and adds a piece, and now all of a sudden we're standing at a more elevated place than anybody has ever stood in centuries. And we get this incredible view that, wait a minute, these people were hardcore esoteric researchers. Jesus and Mary Magdalene are not the simple cartoon figures that we get today. These people, I mean, when was the last time you saw a traditional Christian depiction of Jesus and Mary Magdalene inside of a temple? You never see that. But in fact, I think that would have been their natural place. I think they would have been ransacking these ancient libraries looking for specific knowledge. And the specific knowledge was, how do we go through the gate to God?
They were the original cosmic couple.
I think so. Well, they weren't even the original.
No.
You know what I mean? I mean, you have Akhenaten and Nefertiti who...
Within the last, say, 2,000, 3,000 years.
Right, sure. I mean...
Yeah, you're right. The archetype was not original with the virgin birth and the crucifixion.
None of it is original.
I know.
Not one bit of it. And that's why we're dealing with literary traditions here that become so important. But what they point us to is this incredibly profound knowledge that these figures possessed by themselves, but when they combined it, wow.
Let's just we were throwing on the word alchemy. And 10 years ago, I thought that, you heard that and it has a sort of stigma to it. You just think of very, very, old sort of pictures of people in the Middle Ages tinkering with but Sir Isaac Newton was obsessed with alchemy. Alchemy has endured through the ages, and some of the greatest minds and philosophers have turned their attention toward it. There's something to it, or else it wouldn't have stuck around for as long as it has. This really could be the one great science that could help to explain all of the things that were going on in the ancient past with monatomic gold and the pharaohs and the secrets of Egypt and the things that Nebuchadnezzar was doing. You agree with that?
Oh, I totally agree. In fact, the statement that I offer to people in reference to that, it comes from outside the Bible. It comes from the Pistis Sophia, which is a 2nd to 4th century Gnostic work, and in it we're asked to believe that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were engaged in a conversation. And in response to a question, Jesus tells Mary Magdalene to not do anything but seek the cleansing mysteries or purifying mysteries that will transform you into a being of pure light so that you can inherit the light of my kingdom. I mean, that to me is the mission statement right there. Find the cleansing or purifying mysteries, alchemy, the secrets of alchemy, that will transform you into a being of pure light and lead you into the kingdom of light. Now, again, there is not a single, not one, alleged Christian church on this planet that teaches these cleansing mysteries. In fact, the authorities, the Christian authorities, have done tragic things to withhold that knowledge.
Yeah.
Make sure it never sees the light of day.
It's extraordinary that there are some 20,000 different offshoots and branches of churches of Christianity.
Wow.
And yet not one of them can we point out that have paid close attention to these very important historical possibilities.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, what I think this is all about, these cleansing mysteries or purifying mysteries, as Jesus called them, I found a reference to them, or to purity anyway, in the Egyptian pyramid texts, which are ancient Egyptian texts. And in one utterance we read, "Be pure." Why? It doesn't say why, but it says, "Be pure, occupy your seat on the bark of Ra, row over the sky and mount up to the distant ones, row with the imperishable stars, navigate with the unwearying stars." This is why Jesus was urging Mary Magdalene to seek the cleansing mysteries, the purifying mysteries, so that she could take her seat on the bark of Ra and row over the stars. Now, Rob, the interesting thing about this is that the Egyptians in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, for example, show us portrayals of this bark of Ra. They show him on his ship sailing into a gate of stars. And the ship that he is sailing on looks exactly the way modern science portrays the shape of a wormhole.
Good Lord.
They are identical. And so what I'm saying is that this Stargate mysteries, or Stargate metaphysics as I call it, is the center science. It's what it's all about. It's about viewing this human body as an intermediate form for the soul and transforming ourselves preparatory to entering the gate of the gods so that we can then go dwell in eternity with the gods.
Well, I don't know if the end game, that, of course, is always subject to everyone's interpretation, but I do think, and I've talked about this, I've given lectures on what I call exo-theology, and I talk about Christ going to Heliopolis during his lost years and entering into the ancient schools of wisdom, where he learns these things. And the ultimate test, if you will, of an initiate of one of these ancient schools of wisdom from Heliopolis is returning from the dead. And Christ, all throughout his sermons, talked about how people could do the same thing that he did.
And more, right?
And more. So I think he was pointing, and I think what he does, and I also believe he went through India and also sought out some of the great ascended masters. So he was trying to give this very complex, very esoteric knowledge to the lay people. And I think that was his main mission, using parables, talking about the mustard seed, pointing, knowing full well that the average person didn't have time to wander through India or go to these ancient schools of wisdom, but he wanted to give them a sort of an open door possibility. Do you think that... do you agree with that might have been the motivation of Christ?
I certainly think that's one of them. I believe in all my heart that he, John the Baptist, various of the other disciples, especially Mary Magdalene, were part of that movement at that time that were assimilating these texts from India, from Iraq, from Iran, from Egypt, from elsewhere, that were about affecting this transformation of an ordinary individual into what we might think of as a Christ-like being. But the problem at Jesus' time, as it is with ours, is that you can't have a planet full of Christ running around. They're unmanageable, and they don't pay taxes.
Yeah, and they don't work in factories either.
They don't work in factories.
I say the same thing about Buddhism. I say if we really thought about this and everyone became enlightened, the world as we know would cease to function.
That's right.
Yeah, because so enlightenment for everybody wouldn't work. The world wouldn't work anymore.
And so for whatever reason, these religious and the political authorities have sought to prevent ordinary individuals from accessing this knowledge.
And, it's funny because we always sort of think of people who try to conceal knowledge as evil, but maybe they were pretty wise and had some good reasons.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I always ask people to consider that. I mean, you don't want to, they can't all be evil, and you're right, there is an element of beneficence to this because, look, we're talking about high energy here, and if the wrong person gets a hold of it, you're talking about toast.
Yeah, I
think this is why Nebuchadnezzar was so shocked when the three wise men came back out of the fiery furnace. They weren't toast.
Yeah. And you're right. This is a very complex field. People always love to cast these things into black or white, but it is very gray. There's a lot of different points to consider, and when it comes to looking at events in the Bible and Christianity within this new context, I think people, some of them can be a little edgy, but it's important to do so because we're not going to advance. There's a new paradigm unfolding when it comes to 2012 and the Mayan calendar. And we're going to talk about the connection between Mary Magdalene and the Mayan calendar in just a minute. But we're all entering into this, and we need to update our religion. And this is my opinion. We need to take our existing faith and put it against a larger backdrop. That's what I have been doing in all the talks that I give about the spirituality of disclosure, because the ET reality is one of those main factors that's going to force everyone to doing just that. And I think we should be ready before we hit that curve.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think, Rob, that it really begins with a very simple question, and that is, do I live my life as a citizen of Earth, or do I live my life as a citizen from elsewhere who's temporarily visiting Earth? That is, am I more earthly or am I more heavenly? Do I derive my sustenance from earthly products, from earthly foods, or have I found a way to connect with spiritual sustenance and spiritual foods?
A galactic citizen is what we all could be if we choose to. And if we start thinking in those terms, it will reflect in our speech, it will reflect in our behavior, we'll have more perspective, and ultimately it will reflect in our destiny.
Yeah, one of the examples that I cite is, this is in a category of stuff I call Milky Way metaphysics. It's like you say, galactic citizenship.
Okay.
There's a famous statement by Isis that no mortal has ever lifted her veil and revealed her secrets. And it's assumed that Isis in this instance is a female, a mortal woman. But what I wonder is, let's just say that Isis is in fact the galaxy. And the veil she's talking about is the cloud of dust that literally obscures the center of our Milky Way galaxy. What if we were to take out Isis as the mother and insert that the galaxy is the mother? And the sun that this mother produces is not the S-O-N, as in Jesus Christ, but the sun is the S-U-N, as our star.
Yeah.
And what if we began to identify or find ways to correlate Isis and other of these figures with the galaxy, and look at these myths as describing a time when humankind does develop a means to peer beyond the cloud of dust at our galactic center? Well, the reason I think this is so important is because this is exactly what we're doing right now. Practically on a daily basis, you're seeing a press release from NASA or from the Keck Observatory or the Spitzer Space Telescope about some new astonishing view that we have of the center of our Milky Way galaxy. And I believe that we finally reached a level where our consciousness has come to a place where we can accept a sort of, I call it an anointing. An anointing by the galaxy, and deliverance of new knowledge, a new awakening of our place in the galaxy that can change everything.
Well, that leads us into the connection between the 2012, the center of our galaxy, and Mary Magdalene. Because these are three things that people would ordinarily never connect in their mind. But what do you put forward as a theory that connects Mary Magdalene with what is emanating from the center of our own galaxy?
Well, one of the most important connections is that if you get into any kind of detailed or in-depth research into the Holy Grail, one of the ideas that you're going to be confronted with is that the Big Dipper, the Ursa Major, is actually the Grail itself. And when you follow the modern science, what modern science says about the Big Dipper, they're talking about high-energy cosmic rays that come from the Big Dipper, likely come through the center of our galaxy, and occasionally strike Earth. And what they hypothesize is that these cosmic rays coming from the Big Dipper through our galaxy can have a spontaneous transmutational effect on humans.
What kind of rays are we talking about here?
We're talking about high-energy cosmic rays.
Cosmic rays, which are very destructive to the human body, and it dissipates the DNA in our body, doesn't it?
In our belief system, it does, yes.
Okay.
But what I'm wondering is it possible, why do all these myths keep saying that Ursa Major is the source of the emanations that form the actual Grail? And what I further wonder, is it possible that these emanations they're talking about coming from Ursa Major could have been the actual substance of the anointing oil that Mary Magdalene made? If so, is it possible that she was able to create a substance, called Christos, that had this spontaneous up-leveling effect on humankind? And if so, does that answer the question why, as researchers like Gardner and others like Malachi Martin have pointed out, that the offspring of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, who were called the Desposini, the family of the Lord, does this possibility that she could create a transhuman virtually instantly explain why their family was hunted and murdered by Rome?
Well,
were they in fact an advanced form of humankind that was created from not only their marriage, but also their knowledge of how to harness the power of these cosmic rays and transmute humans in an extraordinary way?
Do you think this Merovingian bloodline that went on to become the kings and queens of Europe were descendants of this sort of a cosmic union? I
think it's possible. I'm not as into the whole bloodline concept as others. I prefer to spend my time and energy focusing on the knowledge that they might have been gathering as opposed to following the details of the bloodline. But it is claimed that the Merovingians did possess extraordinary spiritual or psychic powers. And so, again, it's pure speculation on my part, but I'm wondering, is it possible that they were able to create this mutation? That was not a monstrous mutation, was in fact super advanced.
This, of course, is an extraordinary concept. Why do you say that these rays were cosmic rays? And we have this full spectrum of the electromagnetic spectrum. Why the cosmic rays? Why that sliver?
Well, because that's where the research is directed at right now by modern science. And so I just began to look at it from that perspective, that that's what we might actually be talking about. Another cue for that was the depictions of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, who I think were forerunners of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. In the depictions, Akhenaten are portrayed beneath the rays of the celestial disk called the Atan. And from the Atan emanate these rays that culminate in hands that offer to them the key of life.
Huh.
And so based on that, I'm thinking that we're dealing with some form of cosmic rays, cosmic emanations that they were able to somehow harness and utilize for spiritual purposes.
Well, there is talk of this Mayan calendar, the year 2012, being so significant, and it has been related to our planet, which is just at the edge of our galaxy, our spiral galaxy, entering into an area of space that is more dense than what we have previously been into. And this increased density carries with it a more potential energy that we'll be able to access, and that will result in perhaps physical changes, earth changes, and it might also result in these Stargates that are now dormant that could suddenly come into manifestation.
Absolutely. In fact, I give a presentation called Stargate 2012. I have some DVDs on that, and I found a crop circle from 1995 that I believe was a glyph that represents our galaxy, and it shows exactly what you're describing. It shows a circle, which I would say represents the disc-shaped galaxy. And then it shows this range of what I would call frequency emanating from the center of the galaxy. And so if you're thinking of like a pie chart, this crop circle shows the pie, and then it shows a quadrant, approximately a fourth of the pie is having these waves of frequency emanating from the center. And the thought that occurred to me is that if this crop circle is portraying the galaxy, it suggests that we're either entering into this zone of frequency, or perhaps we're on the receiving end of these waves and they're beginning to lap upon our shores now. And I believe that it's likely that it is this higher energy, as it's described, that will begin to bring this knowledge forward. I mean, a person who's on the forefront of this right now is Dr. Don Brownlee, who's NASA's lead investigator on Project Stardust, which will return pristine cosmic dust particles from beyond Pluto to Earth on January 15th, which will bring extraordinary new knowledge about the possibility of what the galactic center is beginning to offer to us, because it's believed that these dust particles originated from the direction of the galactic center.
Huh. And what is it, do you think, that is in the center of our galaxy that is responsible for this cosmic power source? Well,
they talk about the black hole that's there, but then you have others that theorize there's a white hole there as well that's a sort of a cosmic gusher of this energy. And so, and by the way, that's reflected in the yin-yang symbol, where you have the marriage of the black and white. So right now, I mean, literally on a daily basis, our knowledge is increasing about the possibility of what the galactic center is offering. But again, it appears that this event is cyclical, the one that you were describing with of our sun and solar system either entering into this zone of frequency or on the receiving end of it. And so what I've been going and doing is looking for ancient examples of artwork that portray this cosmic event.
I see. We have to take a break here, but when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the Noah's Ark and about the Ark of the Covenant and how searching high and low in Ethiopia and in these old temples of Egypt for the Ark of the Covenant may be in vain because it could very well be contained inside all of us. Stay tuned. We are back talking with investigative mythologist William Henry. And just before the break, I talked a little bit about how there are indications of an antenna on the Ark. About this, because this is a hell of a teaser.
The basis for this comes from, first of all, recognition that Moses, who constructed the Ark of the Covenant or supervised the construction of it, was trained in the wisdom of Egypt.
Yes, he was with the pharaohs.
Pardon me?
He was with the pharaohs.
Yeah, so there's a firm connection there, an understanding that Moses was trained in Egypt. Well, when you go to the Temple of Abydos in Egypt, which I've referenced a couple of times, and you go into the Shrine of Osiris, you find an extraordinary depiction. You see Isis standing beside this device, and I use the term device for a specific reason, which I'll get to in a moment. You see Isis standing beside this device, and the device clearly has a platform that resembles the Ark of the Covenant. I mean, there's no question that that's what it looks like. But it has this antenna attached to it, which was called the Shuti pillar, or Enlightenment pillar, and on top of that pillar it has two tablets. Well, one of the interesting things about this is that this device was called the Tower of Osiris, spelled T-A-W-E-R, the Tower of Osiris, which meant the bond between heaven and earth. We're dealing with a device that is the bond between heaven and earth. Now, when you look up the word device in the dictionary, it says things like appliance, contraption, mechanical contraption, technology. Okay?
All right.
But a device is also a symbol. A device. They use that in heraldry.
Okay.
They call them a symbol, a device.
Ah.
And so I'm torn between the possibility that this device that she's standing in front of us is a literal technology that is the bond between heaven and earth, also called the stairway to heaven, or it's a purely symbolic rendering of something else. And if so, we have to wonder, well, what could that something else be? And we're so intrigued by this word tower, by the way, because Mary's name means beloved. Her last name, or the name Magdala, means tower. But nobody can agree on where Magdala, meaning tower, actually comes from. But I'm wondering, well, if she's alleged to be a priestess of Isis, could it be a reference to the Tower of Osiris that she derived her name from? She is the beloved tower, or beloved of Osiris, in this instance.
Okay.
But anyway, as I'm looking at this and wondering, what could this device be pointing us to, I started to just kind of study these two tablets, the Enlightenment tablets on top of the antenna. And then I noticed that the antenna was very long, was narrow, and it was attached to the Ark of the Covenant. And in a flash of inspiration, I said, wait a minute, what if this device was in fact representative of a meditating human? And what if the two tablets on top of it were the two hemispheres of the human brain? And what if the antenna portion of it was actually the human spinal cord system? And what if the Ark of the Covenant then was the first three chakras of the human body? I believe that that's what it's alluding to, that in fact the bond between heaven and earth that we all seek is in fact the human body.
And perhaps this antenna could be the conduit for the Kundalini energy.
Absolutely. In fact, in the hieroglyph of Osiris, Rob, it shows a glyph that resembles the Ark of the Covenant that's called the sanctuary, or the shrine, and beside it is another hieroglyph that features a levitating serpent on a pillar. That, and when you put the levitating serpent on the pillar on top of the glyph that resembles the Ark of the Covenant, it forms the complete Tower of Osiris from Abydos, the bond between heaven and earth.
Huh. So you're, I guess, thinking that Moses, being familiar with this concept, used this to actually construct the Ark of the Covenant, to oversee it, and to fit it into this to this design.
Absolutely, and in fact, when you look at the myths and legends associated with this device, they tell us that it held the soul of the Savior Osiris.
Okay.
And it also was capable of drilling holes in space. So now we have to question, what exactly was that burning bush which Moses spoke with Yahweh?
Right.
Is this another example of the fiery furnace, of the gate or zone of frequency between which man and God meet? And I've collected some very, very striking and startling depictions of the gods appearing or manifesting on earth. And in numerous examples that I'm citing here, they show the gods in a doorway, in a gateway. And the depiction leaves it open to your question of whether or not they are actually on earth, or if they are in sort of an airlock, an intermediate zone in between the earthly plane and the plane in which these god beings dwell.
Okay.
And so it would suggest then that the burning bush was some kind of an airlock, if you will, a place where the two worlds could be bonded or joined temporarily, and the god being could be seen and heard and interacted with.
You know, here's a question that I've thought about quite a bit. You might be a good person to ask. Of course, we're talking about the Ark of the Covenant, and that's where the original Ten Commandments were placed. The same stone tablets that Moses brought down from Mount Sinai, although I've also heard that they were not actually tablets, that they were round, and they were inscribed on these round balls. Have you heard of that theory?
I haven't heard that, but I'm wondering if that's an adjunct to the Hebrew legend that there were actually the two sets of tablets. The first set that Moses brought down that he smashed that were made of blue sapphire.
Huh. Okay.
Or blue stones again.
Could be.
Yeah. Well, I think that's very interesting.
Well, the question is, and again, I've been wondering about this for a long time. People always assume, and it's always depicted, that the commandments were written in Hebrew, but Hebrew wasn't even around at that time. So what language was the Ten Commandments written in?
Well, one example or one answer would be it was Egyptian hieroglyphs.
Right. But you've never seen that in any depiction.
Mm-hmm.
You've never, I mean, to show Moses and beholding with a bunch of hieroglyphs, you've never seen that. But in fact, that's probably what happened.
Yeah, they had to sever the connection to ancient Egypt.
Yeah.
And one of the casualties of that severing was the Shuti or enlightenment pillar that I believe was attached to the Ark of the Covenant. That was removed, and I think the reason it was removed is because in example after example, it was the feminine who operated that enlightenment pillar.
Ah.
It was Isis. It was Ishtara. It was Mari. Even in the biblical context, it was Eve who possessed this wisdom. And they had to get rid of the profound role that the women were playing. And so they had to get rid of their pillar, their enlightenment pillar.
Yes.
I think they left an allusion to it because they described the rod of Aaron as being deposited in the Ark of the Covenant. Now the word Aaron means enlightenment or enlightened. So this rod of Aaron could in fact be this antenna that I'm describing, and in this case it would have a telescopic ability because the depictions that we see from ancient Egypt of this combined device suggest that this thing was between 90 and 180 feet tall.
Good Lord.
Yeah, massive, massive device, which matches the dimensions of the golden image of the beast constructed by Nebuchadnezzar. It matches the height of the front porch of Solomon's temple as it was rebuilt during the time of Jesus and Mary Magdalene.
Mm-hmm.
The front porch was 140 feet tall.
Okay. And
so it's very interesting the way various clues about this have come and gone since that time.
Yeah. Another thing about the Ark of the Covenant, of course, it was kept for a long time in the temple, Solomon's temple in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount.
Mm-hmm.
And it was never seen. It was only once a year, Yom Kippur, the high priests were allowed to go in. And even then, they tied a rope around their waist because if they died, a lot of them wouldn't come back out. The energy was so great that no one could go in after them if they did die. What do you think was going on there?
Well, I personally would suggest that we're talking about, once again, the opening of some kind of a portal or a gateway through which the presence was revealed. And again, when we come back to this model of the Ark of the Covenant presented in ancient Egypt, the two cherubim that are depicted in modern recreations of the Ark are always present in the Egyptian originals. But what they portray in between the cherubim is not nothingness, as is shown today, but instead was this pillar that was referred to, in addition to being the Enlightenment pillar, it was also called the head of God. This was the talking head of God, or the pillar through which God actually talked.
I see.
And so, again, when we look at the full capabilities of this complete device as presented by the Egyptians, it suggests that they were actually opening up a portal or a gateway through which they were talking with God.
Extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. I just wonder what the actual physical reason for death would have been for these priests. Maybe some sort of radiation?
That's what they tell us, is that, at least that's modern theoretical physicists who talk about stargates and wormholes, say that the exotic matter of which these gateways would be composed would be harmful to humans. And one of the holdups to actually designing or opening these gateways is coming up with some substance or means by which they could line the tube of these gateways so that they can protect the humans entering them. But when you go back into the ancient tales of these gateways, it's made clear that they weren't that concerned about the out here, because accompanying these gateway stories were examples or stories about individual humans who were cleansed or purified in preparation for going through the gateway.
Fascinating.
Gilgamesh is a good example of that. He learned that he was 2/3 divine, 2/3 Anunnaki, that is, 1/3 human. And the Anunnaki told him, look, if you want to join us, you want to find the gates of the gods, you're going to have to find a means to purify that 1/3 of you that is human.
Well, this, of course, is an extraordinary subject. But in the time left, I thought I'd just ask you about an interesting thing you have on your article, George W. Bush and the Seal of Atlantis. Of course, Bush himself may not be the one who's terribly interested in all of the symbology, but it certainly could be this quiet cabal that many presidents and many people of power have alluded to over the years as being very real, very present, and as one politician put it, you should not speak above a whisper when speaking in condemnation of it. This sort of ancient group, call it the Illuminati, call it what you like, but they themselves might be terribly interested in what's going on in Iraq, and this seal, this symbology. What is this that you reference in relation to what happened during the convention in New York City?
Right. I'm always paying attention to the words that are used, and in particular the symbols that are used by these individuals, because symbols carry so much power. I mean, we all know the adage, every picture tells 1,000 words, right?
Sure.
Well, in this particular instance, what you have is, at the Republican convention, they made a huge deal about this speech that Bush was going to deliver. And they built this incredible platform for his speech. And what it portrays is a red gangplank, if you will, or gateway or canal that feeds into this platform built up of concentric rings. And the president walked out and gave his speech standing in the middle of these concentric rings. Well, when I looked at that, I said, wait a minute, I know exactly what that symbol is, and I went to my book and I pulled it out. And what George Bush was delivering his speech on, the platform that they had custom built or specially built for him, it's the seal of Atlantis. He is standing on a three-dimensional version of this seal. And furthermore, this canal that I described of the blue carpeting is surrounded by a red sea.
Yeah, it's a red ring, but it's broken.
It's a red letter C is what it forms. And so the message that we get from this is that, did George Bush, W. Bush, is he a Moses-like figure who parted the Red Sea and has now come out as the new king of Atlantis and is giving this speech standing in the seal of Atlantis?
It's very heavy psychological operations.
Absolutely. And in fact, in the last part of the speech, Bush says, is it time for us to answer the calling from the stars?
Good Lord.
What calling? What are you talking about? And nobody really pays attention to this stuff. In fact, when Karl Rove, who no doubt was the person who commissioned this seal or approved it, when he was queried about this very strange-looking platform, I mean, the mainstream commentators were like, what is this thing? Rove's like, oh, I know, you got people who are claiming that we've got Christian crosses subliminally embedded in the wood of the podium that he's standing at. And I'm sitting there watching this going, no, Carl, that's not what we're interested in. We're wondering, why are you having him give this speech standing on the seal of Atlantis?
Yeah, perhaps there's more to Karl Rove's political scheming than trying to one-up the opposing members of the Democratic Senate. Do you think that he himself, too, is caught up in these mystical, ancient power symbols?
Well, I can't point to direct evidence that it is he who is, but I would say he's definitely involved. And this administration has been given high marks by mainstream media for its use of symbolism and its mastery of the art and technique of advertising and this sort of thing.
Yeah, there's some great pictures of Bush talking, and there's paintings behind his head, but if you catch it at the right angle, it looks like he has a halo. Yeah, there's a bunch of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, they truly are masters at this. And I cite this as an example of somebody involved there, and I'm saying it's Karl Rove, while it could be someone else, truly understands this, and this is all part of the script. I mean, I would say that in their scheme, the Iraqi invasion has been very successful, and they probably did recover the knowledge that, for example, Sadam was interested in, that once belonged to Ashurbanipal, the king who could read the books from the time before the flood.
Wow.
Well, the time before the flood is Atlantis, in the view of individuals such as I and other researchers who subscribe to these notions.
Yeah.
And so it would suggest to me that, okay, so we went into Iraq, you grabbed that ancient knowledge, and now the new Atlantis is being reformed here in America, just as Sir Francis Bacon had prophesied. And we can't think of a better time than now to proclaim George W. Bush the king of the new Atlantis, and let's just put him up here on this seal and let him deliver this speech.
You know, we talked earlier in this interview about George Bush seemingly fulfilling this ancient prophecy by Nostradamus. And we talked about how things were going according to plan on some of these ancient prophecies, with the rebuilding of Babylon and destroying it as they did. So given the fact that we're on course, where do you see this train heading to? In other words, what's the culmination of these ancient prophecies that seem to be being fulfilled?
Well, of course, it's what is thought of as the rapture. And in my opinion, you can take out the term rapture and insert the word Stargate, and you have what is ultimately prophesied here, when Christians refer to themselves being lifted up and suddenly vanishing from the planet in the rapture event. I think they're talking about a Stargate or a gateway of some kind.
Well, George Bush is an evangelical Christian, and they believe that that's what's going to happen to them physically, that when the rapture comes, they will be actually physically lifted straight up.
Yeah, exactly.
But So you feel as though the end times are beginning to unfold?
Well, I think, yeah. I mean, that when you look at examples, one I'm citing right now is you had that prophecy in the book of Ezekiel 36, 30, and 37, which refers to the Jews returning to Israel and the sudden reformation of the state of Israel. That happened in 1948. Then when you skip to Ezekiel 38 and 39, it talks about Iran getting together with what many people believe is Russia and attacking Israel. And that's exactly what's happening now. You have the Russian scientists that are embroiled in this nuclear stalemate that's beginning to develop in Iran, and we wonder what is really behind all that. Is there a larger alliance between Iran and Russia that is forming behind the scenes, and is their plan ultimately to attack Israel, as the president of Iran has made very clear he'd like to wipe Israel off the face of the map?
Well, the countries that surround Israel are certainly, if they're firing bullets or rockets, it's going to say "Made in Russia" on them somewhere.
Yeah. So that's why I think these are end time prophecies, and these are end time scenarios.
So do you think the emergence of an Antichrist figure will soon unfold?
Quite possibly.
Yeah.
Yep, very possibly. And again, the prophecy or theory is that this will be a figure who will be a peacemaker, but we are to reject this figure.
Right.
And my take is, why? Especially from an understanding that when we're talking in a prophetic sense, peace to the prophets had nothing whatsoever to do with stopping petty conflicts between jealous or petty religious or political leaders as what we see today. These are children that we've put in power. Peace to the prophets meant the unity of heaven and earth, restoring the bond between heaven and earth. And this is exactly what we were talking about a moment ago with the possibility or the idea that our sun and solar system is entering into or on the receiving end of a higher zone of energy or frequency. We're talking about the restoration of the bond between heaven and earth. That is peace. And so when they say this such and so is a peacemaker in the Middle East today, I take that word out and I put in petty conflict resolution specialist. Because that's what they are.
Yeah.
They are not peacemakers.
Well, just to put up
in the prophetic sense.
Yeah. Well, just to wrap this up, we talked about how this concept of the Ark of the Covenant could be metaphorical to one's own body and spinal system. And any parting advice for people who are wanting to benefit from this ancient knowledge and bring it into their own life to raise up their own awareness?
Well, yeah, it's about awareness. I think it's also about vibration. It's keeping your energy and emotion focused on what you do want and not what you don't want. Most of us know what we don't want, but we've got to get a clear idea of what it is that we do want. And then once we can tune our consciousness in that way, it literally will change our personal vibration. And will begin to attract to us the people, the knowledge, the situations that will enable us to fulfill our spiritual destiny.
Yeah, be mindful of your thoughts, everyone. And, speaking of this, I know the good people of London will benefit from that, but you will be in the UK kind of closer toward the fall, won't you?
In September, yeah. I'm going to be in Bristol in September, on September 6th, and then I'll be in Dublin the following weekend.
Oh.
And I'm hoping to set something else up in London and during the week in between those two events. So if they'll pay attention to my website, I should have details up soon, hopefully.
Yeah, of course, your website is williamhenry.net.
Correct.
And I take it that's where you'll direct people go if they want more information about you or your books?
Yes, please.
Okay, williamhenry.net. William, thanks so much for coming on. We do appreciate it.
Rob. Thank you. I'm really glad we finally got a chance to chat.
Yeah, me too. This has been extremely interesting. And hopefully we'll have you back on again and we can pick up right where we left off.
Anytime.
Great. Thanks, William.
Okay, take care.
You are tuned, of course, to Resonance FM 104.4 on your FM dial here in the great city of London, England. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Rob Simone. Hope you enjoyed that interview as much as I did. There are a few things, of course, happening with this program that you might be interested to find out about. Of course, we come to you every Monday at 11:30 p.m. here in the wee hours. And what I try to do is bring to you people that are going to provoke thoughts of a primordial nature. I want you to peer deep inside your very soul and look, gander at the darkness, and take personal inventory and compare it to the information that we have gathered from the ages, from lost civilizations, from esoteric knowledge, from the great scholars and great philosophers. We bring the information to you that you won't find on any other program. Information that you'd be hard-pressed to find or learn at any college or university. This show, then, is truly the invisible college, casting its web over the airways, pulling in the like-minded, the disbelievers, the naysayers, the doubters, the refuseniks, the outside agitators, and the provocateurs, all caught within this net of information. Yes, we do a whole bunch here, safe to say. If you want more information on this program, I invite you to come take a look at our website, www.robsimone.com. Now, I produced the show from Los Angeles now, but I'm planning to come back to the UK really soon. Don't forget to stay tuned to Resonance FM. There is a lot more quality programming coming up, and we shall see you here next week.